Every day, contracting officers review proposals from offerors. They must analyze the pricing in these proposals to ensure that the government will be paying a fair and reasonable price. They may even be called to justify their reasoning. The purpose of this video is to familiarize you with the proposal analysis techniques available to help you evaluate the reasonableness of offered prices. According to the Federal Acquisition Regulation, or FAR, a proposal analysis is performed specifically to ensure the final agreed-to price is fair and reasonable. Although there is much more to the contracting career field, this one foundational task stands prominent. The visibility and importance associated with a fair and reasonable price determination guarantees that it will be reviewed and critiqued by many. That means it is imperative that every proposal analysis effort can withstand scrutiny. The FAR lists and describes 7 proposal analysis techniques. These techniques may be used singly or in combination with others to ensure that the final price is fair and reasonable. Ultimately, the complexity and circumstances of each acquisition should determine the level of detail of the analysis required. Here are the 7 techniques. Let's look at each technique. The first and most often used technique is price analysis. This technique involves the process of examining and evaluating the proposed price without evaluating separate cost elements or the proposed profit. Now let's look at an example. A contracting officer posts a solicitation for ruggedized laptops on GSA's eBuy website. The quotes that are received from several vendors reflect the same contractual terms and conditions, the same required product specifications and delivery schedules. By comparing the bottom line price from these equivalent offers, the contracting officer is using price analysis to establish a fair and reasonable price. The second technique is cost analysis. Like price analysis, this is one of the most common techniques to use. But unlike price analysis, cost analysis looks at the individual elements that make up a price. With cost analysis, fair and reasonable is established by using various procedures to evaluate the necessity for and the reasonableness of each individual cost element, including profit or fee. Now, let's look at an example. A contracting officer is analyzing a sole source cost reimbursement proposal for the development of a new directed energy weapon. Without competition or other commercial equivalents to use for comparison, cost analysis will be needed to determine a fair and reasonable price. A government team working together will accomplish the cost analysis by evaluating the necessity for and reasonableness of the proposed material cost, labor cost, indirect costs, other direct cost, facilities capital cost of money, or FICM, and fee in the offer. The next technique we'll explore is cost realism analysis. While cost analysis looks at the individual cost elements for purposes of reasonableness, cost realism analysis looks at specific cost elements to determine whether those proposed costs are realistic for the work to be performed, reflect a clear understanding of the requirements, and are consistent with the unique methods of performance and materials described in the offeror's technical proposal. It's important to remember that cost realism analysis is required on any type of cost reimbursement contract to help the government get a clear picture of what an offeror's most probable cost will be. On contracts other than cost reimbursement, this type of analysis can be used to help us assess risk and determine responsibility. For an example of cost realism, we will continue with the directed energy scenario. While performing cost analysis on the directed energy proposal, the government team may question a surprisingly low labor element within the proposal. Technical members of the team will be asked to evaluate the realism of the labor hours associated with the engineering and fabrication work effort. Contracting can use the results from their analysis to develop and replace a contractor's estimate with a most probable labor cost for that work. Next, let's look at Technique 4, technical analysis. Often, there are situations where the contracting officer is unfamiliar with what's being purchased. The contracting officer may need to request someone with the right expertise to perform a technical analysis. This individual would analyze such things as the types and quantities of material and labor proposed, as well as review the need for special tooling, equipment, or real property that may have been proposed. Remember, in our earlier example, technical members of the government team evaluated the number of engineering and fabrication labor hours necessary to develop the directed energy weapons system. That's a perfect example of technical analysis supporting a cost realism effort. Technique 5, unit prices, is the next one we will discuss. DoD contracting officers face scenarios where it may be difficult to determine the relationship between the proposed unit price and the actual cost, or intrinsic value, of the item or service. This is where it may be useful to analyze unit prices. In accordance with the FAR, contracting officers must analyze unit prices to ensure that an item is priced according to its intrinsic value and not being blended with shipping fees, non-value-added indirect charges, or other distributed costs that would distort the unit price. The prices we pay now become the basis for the prices we will pay in the future. So it is critical that the value or true cost of an item is accurately represented by the unit price. Technique 6 is unbalanced pricing. Unbalanced pricing exists where the prices of one or more line items are significantly overstated or understated despite an acceptable total evaluated price. This typically happens when an offeror underprices one or more line items and overprices others. The FAR requires widespread application for this technique. All offers with separately priced line items shall be analyzed to determine if the prices are unbalanced. The FAR even says that offers may be rejected if the lack of balance poses an unacceptable risk to the government. Such offers are generally described as mathematically or materially unbalanced. An offer is mathematically unbalanced if it is based on prices that are significantly less than the cost for some line items and significantly more than the cost for other line items. An offer is materially unbalanced if it is mathematically unbalanced and one of the following is true. There is reasonable doubt that the lowest evaluated offer will result in the lowest cost to the government. The offer is so grossly unbalanced that its acceptance would be tantamount to allowing an advanced payment. Now, let's look at the final technique. Technique 7, review and justification of pass-through contracts. Review and justification of pass-through contracts occurs when an offeror informs the contracting officer that it intends to award subcontracts for more than 70% of the total cost of work to be performed. The contracting officer then needs to consider other contract vehicles and the feasibility of contracting directly with the subcontractor or subcontractors that will perform the bulk of the work. So, how do you know which technique or techniques to use? The short answer is the regulations and the need for pricing data determine which techniques will be used. According to the Truth in Negotiations Act, or TINA, there are some contract actions that require the contractor to provide certified cost or pricing data. There are other times when the government can't require that data, but data other than certified cost or pricing data needs to be requested to substantiate a fair and reasonable price. And finally, there are times when data isn't needed because of competition or because the available information in the commercial marketplace is sufficient. To understand this better, let's look at the if-then chart. You'll notice that this chart is broken down into 3 main procurement situations that correspond to these 3 scenarios. In each scenario, you'll also notice that the chart uses the 3 conditions: shall be used, should be used, and may be used. So let's look at the first procurement situation. If certified cost or pricing data are not required, price analysis shall be used. Whenever there are separately priced line items or subline items, unbalanced pricing shall be used. Technical analysis should be used when pricing items that are similar to items being purchased, commercial items that are of a type, or that require minor modifications. This technical analysis will help the contracting officer ascertain the magnitude of changes required and assist in pricing the required changes. Technical analysis should also be used when other data are provided to help assess the contractor's ability to perform as proposed. And finally, cost realism analysis may be used on competitive fixed price incentive contracts. It can also be used in exceptional cases on other fixed price contracts. Are you still with me? Now, let's look at the second procurement situation in the if-then chart. Remember? This is where certified cost and price data are not required, but data other than certified cost or pricing data are necessary. All the techniques from our first procurement situation carry over to this one, so these techniques would be in addition to them. And finally, we have two techniques that may be used: review and justification of pass-through contracts and cost analysis. We're doing great. We've covered 2 of the 3 sections of the chart. Let's now look at the final section of the if-then chart. When certified cost or pricing data is required, we can expect a lot of analysis. Take a look at this list. Cost analysis shall be used to evaluate the reasonableness of individual cost elements when certified cost or pricing data are required. When all offers have separately priced line items or subline items, unbalanced pricing shall be used. Whenever the contract is cost reimbursement to determine the probable cost of performance for each offeror, cost realism analysis shall be used. Unit prices shall be analyzed to ensure that prices reflect the intrinsic value of an item or service and shall be in proportion to an item's base cost. Review and justification of pass-through contracts shall be used when a contractor notifies the government that over 70% of the contract cost will be subcontracted work. As you might expect, certified cost or pricing data also drives a few should statements for the technical and price analysis techniques. Technical analysis should be used to examine, at a minimum, the types and quantities of material proposed and the need for the types and quantities of labor hours and the labor mix. Price analysis should be used in addition to cost analysis to verify that the overall price offered is fair and reasonable. Remember, with cost realism, we're only referring to exceptional cases for most fixed price contracts. It is more commonly used for fixed price incentive contracts. You may use the review and justification of pass-through contracts technique on any contract type when the contracting officer determines it appropriate. This may happen even if the expected pass-through will be less than 70% of the total contract. In summary, we have talked about the requirements for the contracting officer to reach a fair and reasonable price. We explored the 7 proposal analysis techniques and described what each of them entails, and we looked at an if-then chart, which included the 3 possible situations you might face and which techniques to use for each situation. With these tools, you should be well equipped to know which proposal analysis technique best fits your needs. Each procurement is different, and the proposal analysis techniques you will use will depend on the circumstances for each individual action. Remember, there is no one-size-fits-all method when it comes to proposal analysis. You got this.